There are people out there who may not know our story, who just assume, oh, they're probably really sad. Don't talk about kids to them because they tried and shh, it didn't happen for them.
Yeah.
So, and I'm saying, you don't need to tiptoe around us. We're good. We're actually really happy. And we're good with the life that we're living. And we are, I don't want to say we're relieved. I don't want to go that far. Relieved that it didn't happen. That's not it. But we're more than accepting. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to accept whatever the universe threw out. It's not that passive. It was an active choice for us because we could have kept going. Through doctors' recommendations. We chose not to. We said, we're going to actively choose the DINK life.
I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today's guest is going to be talking about a few things that I know a bunch of you are going to relate well to. And that is, first of all, this decision to have kids or not, and how sometimes before the decision is confidently, solidly made, we decide to move forward with trying to have kids. And this is something I've had a few of you share with me privately, saying, I've been doing IVF, or my husband and I have been trying, or I have gotten pregnant and my feelings are still ambivalent. I still don't know if I want this, despite spending time, money, energy trying to have a child. This is not an uncommon experience. And I am so honored that today's guest is going to be talking about her own experience of pursuing IVF, despite still being on the fence about kids. Today's guest also is going to be talking about cultivating and finding child-free community when you're someone who does not have children. Because again, this is something that comes up in a lot of conversations, that it can be hard out there if you don't have kids to find other like-minded people who you can relate to and connect with, and who don't have the responsibilities of raising children. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to today's guest. Florence Wlodarski is the co-founder of Parallel, a new social club and community based out of Los Angeles, designed for those doing life without kids. In her professional life, she spent more than 20 years building community engagement strategies and partnerships between Fortune 500 corporations, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies, with a specialty working with law enforcement in the US. Now, Florence is taking her experience and applying them to building a community for dinks and sinks. Thank you for being here, Florence. I am so glad that the two of us connected just a few short weeks ago. And I got to say, I was initially intrigued by you and what you're up to because of Parallel Social Club, which we're going to talk about today, because I thought, okay, this is really cool. And I know we have some mutual connections with one another, as we discussed or discovered. But the second thing, the reason why I thought I want to have you on to share your story, is you shared something with me in the DMs. And I hope it's okay I share this, because I know we're going to talk about it today. But you said, what a resource you're providing. I was also on the fence. And you said, I was on the fence when I was doing IVF, which I know you thought like, oh my gosh, what a disclosure and an admission. But what I said to you is, oh, I've heard this before. You are not the only one who is on the fence or was on the fence having gone through the IVF process. It's something I hear probably with increasing frequency. And I know there are people listening to this podcast who are in the same boat that you were. So I really appreciated that candor. You and I had a great conversation, and I thought we've got to bring this to the listeners and share a bit about your story, as well as what you're up to at Parallel. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what we need to know?
Yeah. Thanks, Keltie. Thank you for the invitation to join you and have this conversation. It's Florence. I live in Los Angeles. I am 46 years old and not shy about sharing my age.
Nor should you be.
And, when I discovered you and what you're doing, I thought, my goodness, I wish I met Keltie about 4 years ago, when I was going through this kind of journey of being on the fence and trying to figure out what the rest of my life was going to look like.
Yeah.
And so, but, I'm the type of person that loves to kind of dream about what the future could look like and do a lot of scenario planning. So, my journey has been, in my mind, I thought, I wonder if it's unique. I wonder if people think it's strange or people think I'm weird. But after talking to you, because
Mm-hmm.
you've talked to so many different women who
Mm-hmm.
have gone through this journey, I was validated thinking, okay, this is common. Now, I didn't know that several years ago when I was going through that journey. That's why I say, I wish I knew you back
Yeah.
then. But I'm so glad to have met you today and so glad to have this conversation to explore what this looked like for me and what
Yeah.
it could look like in the future for other people.
Yeah. And you know what? For you, this is kind of like a double whammy situation because there is a great feeling, I think, for most women, a feeling like very alone and a lot of struggle when you're going through the IVF process. And then there's a feeling of being very lonely and alienated and other when you're on the fence. And so marrying these things together to say, I'm spending all this time, money, and energy to get this baby that, I'm sure the whole world responds to you like, oh, yes, of course, and may your dreams come true. And meanwhile, you're thinking, do I want this? How bad do I want this? It must have been really challenging. So, we're jumping a little bit ahead in the story. I am curious to know: did you always characterize yourself as someone on the fence, or was there a point in time when you had full confidence that you either did or did not want kids?
Good question. I think, I think I was following the kind of the conventional wisdom or societal expectations so I didn't make a conscious choice. And I didn't think that I was on the fence back then. It was more of, okay, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I thought, of course I'm going to get married and have kids because, that's just what everybody does.
Yeah.
And now I realize that's more societal programming. There are other options, other lives that you can live. But back then, it wasn't even an option to consider. So that's why I say it wasn't really a choice for me. I thought I'm going down this path. I'm going to get married. And for me, I thought, okay, I'm going to have kids one day. And for me, the scenario that made the most sense is I'm going to go get married and then I have a kid. And that's the context, right? Because nowadays, you can do that in any order. You can do it. There are so many different ways that people can have a family. But for me, that was my path. And then once I got into my late 30s, I thought, I'm not married. I just, there are several relationships, long-term relationships that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I think I need to manage my expectations here because at that time it was based on circumstances that I thought, well, this whole idea of getting married and having kids is not really working out in the timeline that I had expected or what other people expect. And so therefore, because I know biology, and I know my biological, that window is closing. Yeah. So I had told myself, you know what, that might not be in my future. That might not be in the cards for me. So in my late 30s, I had already set that expectation for myself that it's okay if that doesn't happen for me.
Did you feel okay with that? Or was there grief with this feeling of like, this is something I wanted or I expected to do and it hasn't happened? Or was it, you really felt like, okay, it's not happening. I need to be real about where I'm at right now?
I would say it was more of an intellectual decision or a reckoning. On an emotional level, I don't think it was that. I wouldn't call it grief at all, which tells me that I wasn't. So I never had this thing about being a mom. It wasn't a part of my goals. It wasn't something that I dreamed about, actually. Okay. I thought it's just something that I'm going to do because everybody does it. So I had other goals related to my career and making an impact in the world and all these other things. And that's where my dreams resided. Now, family and all that was really just part of the natural life process, I thought. Not a goal, not a dream. I didn't think about babies and pregnancy. I actually didn't attach a lot of positivity to that experience. It was actually kind of a scary thing. But I thought it was a beautiful miracle. A lot of my friends started having kids in their 30s, and I was there for that. And I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. Also scary. It wasn't until my, late 30s when I moved back from New York City to Los Angeles, and I was really excited about continuing to build my business that I had started in New York. I was really happy and working really hard. I was a career woman. really just living this really busy life. And then I had not my parents, but colleagues and friends tell me, your window to get married and have kids is closing. You can always build your business later. But if you want kids, you should focus on that now. And so I think after hearing that so many times from peers, I thought, is that something I should really divert my attention to? But I'm really happy. But that's what they're saying. So, okay, fine. Maybe I'll, focus really on dating, focus on getting married and having kids and go down that path. So I have to admit, I did succumb to societal expectations and pressure. And there was a part of me that knew that I was succumbing to that, but I was semi-conscious about it, right? I kind of pushed it out. I said, I think I know that I'm kind of settling in what I want in life so that I can walk this path that is expected of me. But I did it anyway. And then I woke up when I hit 40 and I said, okay, I'm not going to just settle, get married and do all these things because that's what I'm supposed to do. I wanted this. I had big dreams for my life. And so I said, no. And I moved on from a relationship and I began spending more time in my business, having a great time. And at 43, when I wasn't really investing energy there, that's when I met my husband, the love of my life. We met later in life. I was 43 by the time we got married. And it was with him where, when right before we got married, we said, do we want to have kids? We had that conversation. And that was the first time where I actually had a focused, thoughtful, reflective moment about this question of, do we want kids or not? Seeing it as a choice. Because before it was just the next step that I was going to take, even though I was on the fence and I didn't particularly have a desire to go that route and be a mother and all of that. I really didn't have that desire. However, I didn't think I had a choice until I met my husband and we said, well, I'm 43. Do you want kids? We actually did a whiteboarding exercise.
I love
We
it.
sat down and we made a pros and cons list. We went in our own corners, had a solid reflection period, and then we came together and said, okay, what did you discover about yourself? What do you really want? And we both revealed that we were on the fence. We said, we can have kids and that'll be a great life. You'd be a great mom. I'd be a great dad. It would be fun. But also, if we didn't have kids, life would be great. We want to travel. There's so much we want to do together. And so this pros and cons list also had this idea, well, we can still travel with a child, right? We can do these adventures and have this big life with a child. Sounds great. But practically and logistically speaking, we thought, is that really realistic? Probably not given our circumstances. And so because we were on the fence and because I was 43 and I knew every month was important at that time, I was running out of time. My window was closing, or maybe it already closed biologically. So I said, okay, if we want to try, we need to go the IVF route, right? Because this body probably needs some assistance. Right? So the month after we got married, we jumped right into IVF. No time wasted. And I think our primary, or one of the largest or the biggest motivators, was this idea of regret. Because we were on the fence, we couldn't make a decision, but we didn't have the time to, let's think about it for 3-6 months. No, my window was already closing. So we needed to decide. So we said, let's just try and see, because when we're 50 and 60, we feared, what if we regretted not trying? Not regretted not having a child, but regretted not trying. So we said, let's just try. And whatever the universe holds, that's something out of our control, right? It's not like I couldn't control when I was going to get married and find my life partner that I wanted to have a child with. That was outside of my control. And then when that happened, I said, well, we can try to have a child, but that's outside of my control too. So we said, well, what we do have control over is to try. And so we invested 18 months of time. We were initially trying to go through 2 rounds, and then the doctors kept saying, keep going, you can do it, keep going. We went through 6 rounds.
Wow.
And spent a whopping 6 figures, over 6 figures, and which my jaw drops even thinking about that now. Because I had heard stories in my 30s of friends who spent half of that, and I thought it was crazy. But when you're in it, I think we were very goal oriented, and it wasn't because at that time we really, really, really wanted to be parents. It was in order for us, thinking about our future selves, in order for us to know that we won't live in regret or have wonderings, that, the what if game. We said, we're going to do everything we can right now to give ourselves that shot. So for us, that meant going up to 6 rounds. Now our doctor said, why don't you try a 7th? I had friends who were pushing for 7, 8. You can do it. Go to a different country. It's cheaper out there, But at some point, we had to make a decision to stop. And we came to that decision at 6 after about 18 months. And I would say, people ask a lot about grief. I know that those who have gone through IVF, who have put all of that energy, time, resources, it's a lot on a woman's body. For those who do go through those lengths, I think it's commonly assumed, right, that we talked about this at the top of this podcast, that they're going to be 1,000% invested. This is really, really what I want, and that is why I'm throwing everything. It was a big sacrifice on so many different levels. Financially, emotionally, socially, and because we couldn't go out and see friends during COVID, while everybody was out hanging out. We were still in hibernation because you can't get sick while you're going through treatment. So we were still in a little pod. And so there were so many different levels of sacrifice. And, but for us, it was the right thing to do, because for us, we wanted to take it as far as we could so that we had the peace of mind in our hearts and in our minds that we did everything we could, and we had the freedom to go and live this life that we're living now. So we are living this life with gusto. We love it, actually. And I think there are people out there who may not know our story, who just assume, oh, they're probably really sad. Don't talk about kids to them because they tried and it didn't happen for them. So, and I'm saying, you don't need to tiptoe around us. We're good. We're actually really happy, and we're good with the life that we're living. And we are, I don't want to say we're relieved. I don't want to go that far. Relieved that it didn't happen. That's not it. But we're more than accepting. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to accept whatever the universe threw out. It's not that passive. It was an active choice for us, because we could have kept going. Through doctors' recommendations. We chose not to. We said, we're going to actively choose the dink life. We could have adopted. We could have fostered. We could have gone the donor egg route even. Because those were all options that we actually explored. But we chose to stop. We chose to live this dink life. So that's my story.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I have so many different questions. And I guess one of them is, I'm just curious to be in that space of we're trying, we're seeing, what the future will bring. Is it going to be having a child? And yet also feeling like, I don't even know if I want this. That must have been some sort of like inner conflict or turmoil. I'm curious, what was your emotional state as you were going through IVF and having these, failed IVF cycles? Was it sadness? Was it relief? What was it? Was it a bit of both? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I would say sadness because every time I feel so we're my husband and I are very goal oriented, achievement oriented, type A people, and so we said when we're doing this, we wanted it to succeed, of course.
Yeah.
And so after all the failures, each time we got that phone call from the doctor, we looked at each other afterwards and said, well, and 6 phone calls, right? 6 times where we got bad news. I would say out of the 6, probably 2 times I shed tears. The others, especially the at the beginning, were okay. That's okay. Yeah. Do we do this again? It was more that goal. Okay, it's okay. We're going to try again.
Yeah.
And but I think it was maybe the 4th or 5th one where we thought we had so much expectation placed that was going to be the cycle to win, and it didn't happen. And we went as far as naming that future child, right?
Wow.
We thought it was and we said it only takes one. We're going to name, if it's a girl, we're going to name her One because it only takes one. And we've injected a lot of humor into our process. And so, and we were very open with each other and supportive of each other's responses to bad news. Yeah. And that was incredibly helpful. But I would say there were 2 moments of kind of the sadness, overall sadness, yes, but it wasn't as devastating as it would be for, I know, other friends who have gone through this process. There was a long grieving process after it was all over. For me, I think because I was on the fence and because I was really excited of what life could look like, and we said, you know what, life will be good. And we both said this to each other: whichever life we choose or whichever life happens, we're going to make the best out of it. That was our attitude from the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot,
Yeah. I think that's super powerful to be able to take that perspective. And I know it's not easy, especially because I would imagine when we go down a path, whatever that is, like we kind of get swept into that, right? And of course, our hopes start to build and we start to imagine a future, in particular, especially, if we're thinking about having kids, of how that life will look. It's interesting because it almost makes me think, and I'd love to hear if you agree, in some sense, having tried the IVF route, having agreed to those 6 cycles, it gave you kind of the permission to then have this life that you had been dreaming about, to say, we now have some sort of like peace and solace in knowing we did try, but actually there's this other life waiting for us. Do you think there was part of that, like kind of granting yourself that permission? Or maybe I'm not articulating that quite right.
No, I think you're articulating something really deep, actually. The permission piece. I think I probably subconsciously thought of that, but hearing you say it, Keltie, it resonates with me. So what I'm processing right now as I'm having this conversation with you is yes. The answer is yes. I did feel like going through that was a permission structure that I needed in order to feel free to move forward. Now, I am Korean American, born in the U.S., born and raised in the U.S., having parents who grew up in Asia. My family, they're Asian, they're Americans, but there's still that cultural element. And so I have that. That's probably where a lot of that programming came from. Of course, you're going to have kids. Of course, you're, kind of like, of course, you're going to go to college for me. So that part was, now that I look back and realize that I was probably grappling with this conflict inside where I wanted this other life, but I thought I was supposed to live the standard kind of traditional expected life that the majority lives. And so I know you and I are in the minority, and one of the reasons we started Parallel Social Club in LA was because we realized that it's really hard to find other people who are walking this path and living this parallel life. But that did, going through that process and throwing everything we had at the IVF journey did make me feel like, you know what? I tried. I really did. And now I have total freedom and freedom, flexibility, even joy, may I say?
Oh, of course. Please do. It does exist.
To move forward in really designing and crafting this next phase of my life.
Yeah. I'm interested to talk about sort of the discernment piece of like, when is enough enough? It sounds like there was that agreement from the beginning. We can say perhaps, and maybe you can speak to why 6, but we can say it's arbitrary or because most people conceive within 6 or whatever it is. But for people who are listening, who maybe right now are trying, whether through IVF or just through, natural conception, what have you, and they're wondering, like, I'm on the fence. Do I keep going? If so, for how long? Even if this is something they really wanted, right? I've had conversations on this podcast with women who've really wanted children, who've had to discern when's enough. And so I'm wondering if you either have advice you might share, or maybe just a reflection on your own experience that might help someone to figure that out.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I asked that question of myself when I was going through this process. At first, we set a budget and we said, when we enter into this journey, we're going to try 2 rounds, right? And then after the second round, I learned that I didn't do enough research and I didn't optimize my body's chances because I left it all up to the doctors and I didn't advocate for my own. I would say I wasn't the most active participant in my journey. And, in healthcare, you need to be your own advocate. And so I changed clinics, found a new doctor, did a ton of research, basically quit my job. And this was my full-time job. And then that's why we decided to move into our 3rd round, because I thought, well, there's still opportunity. We didn't take it all the way, so we kept going. And the doctors, yes, they, there are a lot of different opinions about the fertility industry, but I would say there are doctors that will tell you should stop. Right? They will tell you based on your numbers, let's say. And my doctors, I went through 3 different clinics and they all said, keep going, you still have a chance. And I understood that it was a game of numbers, a lottery. And so my husband and I talked about, well, how much do we how far do we go with this?
Yeah.
Even 5, we were going to stop at 5. And then we did stop. We took a break for a few months. And then out of the blue, we said, you know what? How about one more? Because you just feel like, you just need that one lucky egg. Yeah. And so we tried one more and then we said, okay, that's it. Now, how do we come to that process? I had friends who had gone 10 rounds. 11 rounds, spent 3 years of their life trying. And then, it didn't work out. For us, the process was we had to go through a lot of reflection. It wasn't just, one day we decided, let's stop. No, it wasn't really a flimsy decision. I don't want it to sound like, since we were on the fence, it was easy for us to stop. No, we had invested a lot of time and we sacrificed so much. Plus, on the finance side, it's not like we had a lot. It's not like we're millionaires and we had, 6 figures to spare to try this. Yeah. No, it took sacrifice. And so going 8, 9, 10 rounds was not realistic but I know people who borrow money from family
Yeah.
take out a loan to do this, right? So there are options out there. For us, the question was all about at what cost, not just financially, but energy, time, all kinds of resources, not just money.
Yeah.
So the question, I think the advice that I would give is to really sit down and think about at what cost. And some people will go into debt to make their dream of motherhood come true. And that's their decision. And if I had someone in my orbit that was going through that, I would say, go for it. But for us, the decision was based on careful analysis of kind of at what cost. I gave up my career, and I put a pause on it. That was really hard for me. I do 18 months, no socializing for an extrovert to have no social life and only see my sister and parents once in a while. That was really hard.
I bet.
And, to decline invitations to dinners and events, I had to say no because I was in treatment. And so for us, it was a very careful calculation of how far do we go at what cost. And, so I would say for those who are trying to figure out, well, when do we stop? It's going to be, maybe it's even there's the heart level, but if the heart level is really confusing, making a list of, okay, what are the costs? What are we willing to do? How far do we go?
Yeah.
And going through that mental exercise, putting that down on paper and staring at it could also be really insightful in helping a person make a decision.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. If you are on the fence about kids, let me know if you can relate to this feeling of like, how am I supposed to make sense of all of this information, all of these different inputs that I'm getting, what people are saying, the books that I'm reading, the thoughts and emotions that I'm feeling in my brain and my body. If you are having trouble finding your way forward to a clear and feel-good decision, you are going to want to check out my 3-month group coaching program, Kids or Childfree. This is a program specifically for women who are on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child-free, to give you a process or a methodology, if you will, to help you figure out which path is right for you. This will be happening in the company of like-minded women who get what it's like to be stuck, as I take you through a step-by-step process to help you figure out whether having kids or staying child-free is the right path for you. If you want more information, the next round of this program is going to be starting the very beginning of April. We're running for 3 months. This is available online, so you can take part from anywhere in the world, and all of the information will be linked in the show notes of today's episode, or can also be found at kidsorchildfree.com. Again, that's my 3-month Kids or Childfree group coaching program, and I look forward to having a bunch of you join us for the next round of the program. I'm glad you gave voice to those factors. And I know it's something you mentioned before this conversation, the opportunity cost of not just going through IVF, but being on the fence, being in the middle. We tend to forget that, aside from the discomfort of hanging out there in the unknown and not knowing, like it does have a very real impact on the way we feel about our lives, the decisions we make or don't make, the experiences we have or don't have. I think about how often we tend to leave this sort of door open for let's wait and see in case we have kids. And that has a real bearing on our life and the direction that things take and at what pace. So I don't know if you have anything else to add about opportunity costs and what those might have been for you, but is that something you've thought about quite a bit?
Oh yeah, trade-offs, opportunity costs. We knew that, for me, I tend to have workaholic tendencies.
Yeah.
And so when I get into my work phase and I love it, it's all in for me. But what comes along with that is a high level of stress. And stress is the enemy of fertility and kind of going through that process. You need to manage your stress in order to optimize your body to respond to the treatment and get pregnant. So we decided that we would go on one income and that I would really just focus on being healthy, taking all kinds of vitamins, 9, 10 supplements throughout the day, and exercising and giving my body the best shot possible. And so, but what that meant was that I had to give up the career building process that I absolutely loved. And I did go through in my first year of the fertility treatment process. I would say I was probably depressed. I have to admit that it was, I went through an identity crisis because I thought, well, I don't have this career. I would go on LinkedIn and see all these people advancing, my peers advancing in their careers. And I took a break. Now, I think of those mothers who take a break from uh, an accelerated pace for their careers. When they have a child, they go on maternity leave or take a year off or two. And I was just going through the fertility process and taking time off, and was completely anxious about how I would enter the workforce again after this process. And most women enter the workforce again after, they have a 2-year-old, right? Say, oh, that's the reason why. Well, if I don't have a child, what was my reason for taking 2 years off and slowing down my career? And seeing everyone advance and me seeing myself standing still because I was going through a very personal journey, was honestly probably one of the more difficult parts of this, because my identity was so wrapped up in career and what I was going to do to make my mark on this world, and just, running hard on building my business. And because I loved it, I left what I loved to go on this journey. And, but I did learn a lot about myself, about the whole idea of identity. I learned how to relax. That's something that was a big needed lesson for my life. So a lot of good came out of this journey as well.
Yeah. It sounds like, the theme and topic of careers come up quite a bit in this conversation. I know you characterize yourself as a career woman. You're very driven. It's something that brings you a lot of joy. And yet there was this narrative of like, okay, Florence, like you want to probably sideline the career because having a family is what the most important thing needs to be. And then of course there was this like give and take, this back and forth as you're navigating IVF and then coming back to the workforce. Like, do you feel you've made the quote right moves? I know there can definitely be judgment. And first of all, did you feel like you had to choose, like your career was pitted against any desire for becoming a mom? And then would you do anything different if you were to do it again, as far as where that focus is or where you put your energy? Or are you glad with how everything unfolded?
Yeah, great question. For me, I didn't feel like I had to choose between a career or motherhood. I did take a break from my career during the IVF process, but that was because surely just to manage stress, not because I felt like I couldn't handle, I knew that if I had a child, I'd go back to work and do the whole thing. I wouldn't be a stay-at-home mom. I would still do the business thing. But during that period, because of, and it's not a commentary on women, but it was a commentary on my own personality, because I run so hard. And sometimes I can get tunnel visioned. Work and fertility treatment could not coexist. For other people, actually for most people that I know that went through IVF, they did both. But for me, because I didn't know how to turn down the dial with work, because I always pour everything into whatever I do, didn't know how to do that. So I needed to quit that so that I can focus on IVF research, optimizing my body, relaxing, and, all of that. So that's just very, very particular to me. But if I were to go back and since this career thing has come up, would I have changed things? Those voices when I was in my mid to late 30s that said, don't focus on your career so much. You're going to miss your window, right? If I think back to that, do I regret not listening to them? No. Do I regret the life that I lived and the path that I took? No. I love how my life unfolded, actually. I don't regret those things, those choices that I made, the long nights that I worked, the clients that I worked for, the experiences that I had. I feel very grateful for the experiences in life and the travel, et cetera, that I was able to have. So I can't right now look back and say, I don't even go through that what if exercise. What if at 37, I decided to run slower in my professional life and decided to, I don't think about that because I had so much fun. I honestly had so much fun.
Well, and it sounds like you've brought a lot of intentionality to your life, like to date. You, in terms of where you've put your energy and the things that you've, put emphasis and importance on. And I think typically when we ask these what if questions, it's when we're operating on autopilot. But it sounds like you've been very deliberate and conscious in questioning what is it that I want, and even if the answer was I don't know, like being eyes wide open as far as how you pursued things. So yeah. And what ifs they don't really serve us, do they? Because we can't go back in time anyways. So
I know.
okay, I want to make sure that we have lots of time to delve into Parallel Social Club. But before we hear more about this project, I'm just curious to know, we talk sometimes about the language around not having kids, and we talk about child free as by choice, childless is by circumstance. A lot of people are going to argue those categories, they're not really that comprehensive, and I would agree. How do you characterize yourself? And if someone were to ask, are you child free? Are you childless? What would you say?
Yeah. I would say I'm kid free, or I'm living life without kids.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have shied away from using either term because I know that they're loaded. I know that there are, I think terminology purists would probably call me childless because I tried to have a child. But if I were forced to make a choice of, of the terms, then I would say I would go more toward child free. That's where that's the vibe I resonate with more than being childless, because in my mind I had options. I could have chosen to be a mom. I could have, if I wanted to, I could have adopted. We went down that, we explored that path. We had informational interviews. We could have fostered. We talked to multiple foster moms to see what that life would be like. We actually explored all paths. Donor egg, that was an option. And I have many friends. I had examples around me of women who used donor eggs. They were in their 40s. They used donor eggs, and they gave birth, and they're wonderful moms and loving it. So I had these examples. We even went as far as looking at a donor egg database and swiping the women's, who are in their 20s. I'm thinking, oh boy, it's a weird process.
I can only imagine.
It's kind of like dating. You're looking at a dating profile, but for women who could potentially provide the genes for your child. So we did go through all those. We explored them just to see what they were like. And then we chose not to be parents. We chose not to pursue those options. I think what's really great in our society today is that women have a lot of options now that they didn't have several decades ago. And it's a lot more accepted now culturally to be a single mom, or to, use a donor egg, or to adopt. There's so many options. And so because we didn't we chose not to pursue those options. In my mind, I chose to be child-free.
Yeah.
But I don't use those terms.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I do think they're limited. And yet I also appreciate that. I do think there's perhaps a greater degree of empowerment for some people, not for all, right? For some people, saying, no, I'm childless feels like that more apt suiting term. But there is this sense of agency, and like, well, no, I've still had choice in this matter, and I've chosen when to stop, and I've chosen how far to go, and I've chosen to embrace this life without children. So
yes.
Okay. Yeah. I want to hear all about Parallel Social Club. Tell us what it is, how this inspiration for the project came to be.
Yeah. So Parallel is a social club and membership community for those doing life without kids. So for people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, that's our target group. But if people who are in their 60s, people who are in their 20s are interested, they're welcome. But the idea came about because once we ended our fertility journey, we were looking to go back into having this robust social life, and we realized that all of our friends really are doing the parenting thing. And our conversations were so different. Their schedules were so different. And so we said, in order for us to have this robust social life, we need to find another layer of friends who are living our lifestyle, kid free, and also those who are in our age range, not the 20-something-year-olds, because there are other ways that our lives don't really align because of age. So life stage was really important. That's why I said 30s, 40s, and 50s, who, for whatever reason, by choice or circumstance, are doing the kid-free lifestyle. We welcome them into the community. We run in-person social events in Los Angeles. And what we're aiming to do is bring people together to meet new friends and align on, yes, this lifestyle, but look towards the future. How do I want to live my life? How do I want to live a kick-ass life? Right? For those who want to go on this journey together with others who are walking that parallel path, we started this community so we can all be together and have a great time, do social events, and we are hoping to launch a virtual membership community so that we can have friends in Toronto, New Zealand, Singapore,
Munich.
Munich, yes. And so we just got started a few months ago, late last year, and we're so excited to grow this community. We have almost 50 people who have come together in LA, and we see each other every few weeks, and it's been an amazing ride.
Wow.
Building this community.
Yeah. You know, I love how this is now part of your journey. And I think let me know if you agree. I hope you do. But I think oftentimes when we've struggled with something, when we felt, in your case, like maybe felt outside of your peers, not necessarily having those connections you want, like creating the solution that we would want to see, the support network that we'd like to have. And for people who are struggling right now because they're either on the fence or they've made this decision not to have kids, certainly I hope that they'll check out what you're up to. But I think it's also a reminder, we talk about agency, saying to ourselves, what control do I have in this matter? And how can I be that change that I want to see? Would you say that that sort of was that inspiration for you of like, this is something I want, therefore I will build it?
Absolutely, Keltie. You said it. We were looking out into the marketplace saying, well, how do we find other people? How do we meet other people that are living this life? How do we build meaningful relationships with them that will go the long haul? When all our other friends who have kids will eventually maybe have grandkids. When we're 60, we want to make sure that we have our chosen family of friends, those who are walking parallel paths. How amazing would that be? We were looking out there to try to find a group. It was really hard to find. And so we started this group. And then once we did, it was really an experiment. And it was wonderful to see people kind of coming out of the woodwork saying, I didn't even know this group existed. Sign me up. And so I think loneliness, the sense of wanting validation, those are important drivers, but for people looking for this community. However, there are a lot of people who are just saying, you know what, I could go to the Super Bowl party with my friend where everyone else is a parent and the kids are running around and all they're talking about is their kids, or I could go to a Super Bowl party with a bunch of other people who are living my parallel life, who are around my age, and we can talk about all these other things, not the kid-centered conversations. And so I think that is something, hopefully, that is going to add value and really uplift people's lives. So that's the goal.
Well, having known you a short time, having seen what you're up to with Parallel, having heard about the vision now on a few occasions, I have zero doubt that you're going to have immense success with it and that you're going to impact so many people with this. And I'm just really excited to see how it's going to grow. So
thank you.
I understand that you mentioned the virtual membership. There's something you wanted to share. I think that people should be keeping their eyes and ears attuned to the website to find out about that.
Yes. And so while we are building the in-person community in Los Angeles, we hope to launch a virtual community to invite people from all over the country in the US and all over the world to tune in and gather online, let's say via Zoom, and find community there. So we will be launching that in the near future. So if anybody around the world is interested, they can go to the website parallelsocialclub.com, sign up for our newsletter, and let us know what city you're in. And if there are, a lot of people in Munich, perhaps there will be a parallel in-person community, Parallel Munich, that gets started. So,
all right. Super cool. I'm curious if there's a lot of people in Munich. So check it out. Reach out to Florence, and we'll make sure to both include your social details as well as the website where people can find info about the virtual network as it launches. And of course, if you're in Los Angeles, people can check out the network so they can be part of that, be part of the social club on the ground.
Yes. And they can find us on Instagram at Parallel Social Club.
Amazing. Okay. Before we wrap up, we have our 5 rapid fire questions that I love to ask our guests. The first one is, finish this sentence. Being child-free is?
A wonderful experience.
Being child-free is not?
Is not what the media portrays.
That is true. Very true. Mm-hmm. What is one tool or resource that you think might help people with a decision if they're on the fence?
Talk to people. Talk to Keltie.
Yes, I love this answer.
No, honestly, I have been referring your website and this podcast to many different people because I personally would have loved to have discovered you when I was going through that journey many years ago. I think it's not talked about. People don't see examples of people who are on the fence, who are open to having a conversation about it. Yeah. So it's really valuable to find others that you can relate to. So talking to people would be great for people.
Okay. And I'm curious, what's one thing that you would like moms to know?
That just because someone is childless or child-free, doesn't have kids, doesn't mean that they're not living their life to the fullest.
I really, really love that. Thank you. Okay. And the last question is, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that piece of advice be?
Talk to people you trust to get perspective, and talk to yourself. Reflect, dig deep. And I think you need both. Talk to yourself to understand you and try to understand your desires as deeply as possible, but also talk to others for perspective, because I think perspective is really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Florence. I so enjoyed this conversation. As always, I could talk to you for hours and hours. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Yes, thank you everyone for tuning in, and I wish everyone a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you, Keltie.
All right, I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I get positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.